In the bustling playground of Willowbrook Community Center, where the sound of children's laughter echoes off weathered swing sets, Robert Miller kneels beside his 7-year-old daughter Lucy, patiently helping her tie her shoelaces for the third time this morning. What he doesn't know is that his gentle teaching voice is about to catch the attention of a desperate billionaire mother whose silent son has never spoken a single word. And in just a few short months, she'll be begging Robert to become the father her child has always needed. Could this struggling single dad's gift for unlocking voices transform not just one family but his entire world? Before we dive into this incredible journey, tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and if you believe in the power of second chances, make sure to hit that subscribe. His weathered hands, stained with coffee from his 4 a.m. shift at Henderson's Diner, grip a thermos that's seen better days. The steam rises in lazy spirals, much like his thoughts as he calculates how many tips he'll need to cover Lucy's upcoming school supplies. Robert's voice carries naturally across the playground as he calls out encouragement to Lucy. "Remember what we practiced, sweetheart. One hand, then the next. Your muscles remember the pattern." His tone is warm, patient, instinctive, the voice of someone who understands that learning happens at different speeds for different children. At 34, Robert carries the weight of responsibility that settled on his shoulders 3 years ago when his wife Emma passed away from cancer. The same gentle patience that made him an exceptional speech therapist at Riverside Children's Hospital now serves him as a single father working double shifts to make ends meet. The irony isn't lost on him. He once helped children find their voices professionally, and now he struggles to find his own in a world that seems determined to silence hope. Lucy drops from the monkey bars and runs toward him, her dark curls bouncing with each step. She signs as she approaches, her small hands moving in fluid gestures that Robert reads as easily as spoken words. "Daddy, there's a sad boy by the sandbox." He's not playing with anyone. Robert follows her gaze across the playground to where a small figure sits alone in the shade of the recreation center building. The boy, maybe 5 or 6 years old, has perfectly combed blonde hair and clothes that look expensive even from a distance. He's methodically arranging sandbox toys in precise lines, his movements deliberate and focused. But it's his complete isolation that tugs at Robert's heart, the invisible bubble that seems to separate him from the chaos of playground life. "Should we go say hello?" Robert suggests, his trained eye already noting the telltale signs he's learned to recognize. The way the boy stimulates by rocking slightly, the careful organization of objects, the intense focus that blocks out surrounding noise. Lucy nods enthusiastically, her natural empathy, one of the gifts Robert cherishes most about his daughter, already engaged. They approach slowly, Robert's movements deliberately calm and non-threatening. Years of working with nonverbal children have taught him that first impressions matter enormously. "Hi there," Robert says softly, settling onto the bench near the sandbox. "I'm Robert, and this is Lucy. We were admiring your organization skills. Those cars are lined up perfectly." NTHE boy doesn't look up, but his hands pause in their arrangement. Robert notices the slight tilt of his head, a sign of listening, of processing. Lucy sits cross-legged in the sand nearby, not attempting to touch the boy's carefully arranged toys, instinctively understanding boundaries that many adults miss. Lucy's learning sign language. Robert continues conversationally, as if speaking to the air. "She was born with hearing difficulties, so we've gotten pretty good at talking with our hands. Sometimes words aren't the only way to communicate." This time, the boy does glance up, just briefly, and Robert catches sight of intelligent blue eyes that seem far older than his apparent age. There's something achingly familiar in that look, the expression of a child with so much to say but no clear path to saying it. From the corner of his eye, Robert notices a figure approaching from the parking area. A woman in an impeccably tailored charcoal gray suit walks with purpose toward the playground, her heels clicking against the asphalt path. Even at a distance, everything about her speaks of wealth and influence. The designer handbag, the perfectly styled auburn hair, the way she carries herself with unconscious authority. NBUT as she draws closer, Robert sees something else in her expression that all the money in the world can't mask: exhaustion. Worry. The particular brand of desperation that comes from loving someone you can't quite reach. NTHE woman's eyes scan the playground until they land on the boy in the sandbox, and her entire posture shifts. Relief floods her features, followed immediately by a familiar tension that Robert recognizes from his own parenting moments. The constant anxiety of a parent whose child needs extra protection in a world that doesn't always understand. "Nathan, sweetheart," she calls softly, approaching the sandbox with movements as careful as Robert's had been. "It's time to go, honey." "NTHE boy." Ethan doesn't respond to his name, continuing his meticulous arrangement of toy cars. The woman kneels beside the sandbox, her expensive suit heedless of the sand, and Robert watches her face cycle through expressions he knows all too well: patience, frustration, love, and the kind of tired worry that never really goes away. "He doesn't like transitions," she says quietly, though whether to Robert or herself isn't clear. Changes in routine are difficult. Robert finds himself standing, his natural instincts as both a father and former therapist engaging. "Would it help if we counted down from 10? He suggests gently. Sometimes having a framework for change makes it easier to process. NTHE woman looks up at him then, really seeing him for the first time. Her eyes are the same blue as Ethan's, but where the boys hold ancient wisdom, hers hold the particular exhaustion of someone who's been fighting an uphill battle for years. "You know about autism?" she asks, and there's something vulnerable in the question, as if she's afraid to hope for understanding from a stranger. "A little," Robert admits. "I used to work with kids who process the world differently. Every child has their own language. Sometimes we just need to learn how to listen." If responding to the gentle certainty in Robert's voice, Ethan looks up from his toys, his gaze settling on Robert's face with unusual directness. For a moment, the playground noise fades away, and Robert feels that familiar spark of connection that used to make his job feel like calling rather than career. What he doesn't know is that this chance encounter in a suburban playground is about to unravel the carefully constructed life of one of the most powerful women in the country, and offer him a future he never dared to imagine. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. And Robert kneels beside the sandbox, his voice taking on the calm, rhythmic tone that once filled therapy rooms at Riverside Children's Hospital. "Okay, Ethan, let's try something together. We're going to count backward from 10, and when we reach 1, it'll be time to put the cars away. Would you like to help me count?" NTHE woman, still unnamed but clearly Ethan's mother, watches with the intense focus of someone who's tried every expert, every method, every hope-filled technique that money can buy. Her manicured fingers twist the handle of her designer purse, a nervous habit that speaks to countless similar moments of watching strangers attempt to reach her son. Nathan's hands pause over a red toy car, his blue eyes flicking briefly to Robert's face. It's the smallest acknowledgement, but Robert recognizes it immediately. The moment when a nonverbal child decides whether to trust a new voice in their carefully ordered world. In 10, Robert begins, his voice steady and warm. 9. 8 NTO. Everyone's surprised, Ethan's lips move silently, as if trying to form the numbers. Lucy, sitting cross-legged nearby, begins counting along in sign language, her small hands creating the visual rhythm that often helps children process sequential information. Min 7. 6. 5. Robert continues, and this time, Ethan's mouth clearly shapes the word 5, though no sound emerges. The woman's breath catches audibly, her composure cracking just enough to reveal the raw hope underneath. 4, 3, 2. On 2. Ethan actually vocalizes, a soft, tentative sound that might not register as speech to most people, but sends visible shock through his mother's system. In 1. Robert finishes gently. Time to say goodbye to the cars until next time. Ethan looks down at his perfectly arranged vehicles, then carefully places each one in the sandbox's toy bin. The transition that his mother had been dreading happens smoothly, naturally, without the meltdown that apparently usually accompanies any change in his routine. "How did you?" The woman begins, then stops, pressing her lips together as if afraid that speaking might break whatever spell Robert has just cast. Sometimes it's not about getting them to change. Robert explains quietly, helping Lucy stand and brush sand from her clothes. It's about giving them a framework that makes change feel safe. Ethan's clearly brilliant. He just processes transitions differently than most kids. NTHE woman stands as well, her movements precise, despite the obvious emotional impact of what she's just witnessed. Up close, Robert can see the exhaustion lines around her eyes, the kind that come from years of hope, followed by disappointment. Her suit is impeccable, her jewelry understated but clearly expensive, yet none of that wealth seems to have solved the puzzle of reaching her son. "I'm Victoria Lancaster," she says, extending her hand with the automatic politeness of someone accustomed to formal introductions. "And you've just accomplished something that dozens of specialists haven't managed in 3 years." Robert shakes her hand, noting the firm grip and the way she maintains eye contact, a woman used to being taken seriously in boardrooms. "Robert Miller. And this is my daughter Lucy. We're just neighbors, really. Lucy and I come here most Saturday mornings, and Daddy used to help kids talk at the hospital," Lucy adds with the proud simplicity of a 7-year-old. "Before Mommy went to heaven and we had to find new jobs." Victoria's expression softens at Lucy's matter-of-fact explanation, and Robert sees her quickly reassess him, taking in his worn jeans, the coffee-stained thermal shirt, the clearly second-hand jacket that's seen better winters. The contrast between his appearance and his evident skill with her son creates visible cognitive dissonance. "You're a speech therapist?" Victoria asks, and there's a hunger in the question that Robert recognizes. The desperate hope of a parent who's been searching for answers. Robert corrects gently. "Budget cuts at the hospital. Now I work at Henderson's Diner downtown." Different kind of communication challenge. Remembering who ordered what and keeping the coffee fresh. NHE means it as a light comment, but Victoria doesn't smile. Instead, she studies his face with the intensity of someone evaluating a potential business investment. Ethan has wandered over to the swings, not to swing but to examine the chain links with the same methodical attention he'd given the toy cars. Ethan hasn't spoken a word since he was 2. Victoria says quietly, her gaze following her son. "Not one word. We've tried everything. Private specialists, experimental programs, cutting-edge therapies. I've flown experts in from Switzerland, sent him to programs in California that cost more than most people's annual salaries." Robert watches Ethan counting chain links silently, his small fingers tracing each metal connection. "But you've never tried just talking to him like he's already listening." "What do you mean?" "Most people see a nonverbal child and assume he can't understand, or that he needs to be fixed before real communication can happen. But Ethan's been communicating the whole time. Through his organization, his focus, his careful attention to detail. You just saw him count backward with us. That's not a child who can't process language. That's a child who needs language presented in a way that matches how his mind works." Victoria's phone buzzes, a sharp, corporate sound that makes Ethan flinch near the swings. She glances at it automatically, then deliberately powers it off, a gesture that surprises Robert. In his experience, people dressed like Victoria Lancaster never turn off their phones. "I need to ask you something," she says, her voice carrying the directness of someone unaccustomed to small talk. "And please understand that I'm not someone who makes impulsive decisions. But what you just did with Ethan, I've been searching for that connection for 3 years." Robert feels Lucy's hand slip into his, her small fingers squeezing in the pattern they use when she senses adult tension. He squeezes back reassuringly, but his attention remains on Victoria's face, reading the careful control that barely masks deeper emotion. "I'd like to hire you," Victoria continues. "To work with Ethan. Name your price." "I mean that literally. Whatever you were making at the hospital, I'll triple it. If you need benefits, education support for Lucy, housing assistance, whatever removes the barriers that keep you from doing what you're clearly meant to do, NTHE offer hangs in the air between them like something too large to process immediately." Robert's mind automatically calculates. Triple his old hospital salary would mean Lucy's school supplies without stress, medical coverage, maybe even the hearing aids her audiologist recommended but insurance wouldn't cover. NBUT something in Victoria's intensity, in the way she approaches his expertise like a business acquisition, sends warning signals through his experience with institutional thinking. He's seen too many well-meaning programs treat children like problems to be solved rather than people to be understood. That's incredibly generous, Robert says carefully. But Ethan isn't a puzzle to be solved in exchange for money. He's a little boy who needs someone to meet him where he is, not where others think he should be. And Victoria's expression shifts, and for a moment, the corporate mask slips entirely. "Mr. Miller," she says, and her voice cracks just slightly on his name. "I would give everything I own to hear my son say, 'Mama,' just once. Money isn't the point." Results are. And across the playground, Ethan has finished examining the swing chains, and is now standing perfectly still, his face turned toward the conversation between the adults. Robert realizes the boy has been listening to every word, processing in his own way the negotiation about his future. "What do you think, Ethan?" Robert calls out, including him in the decision in a way that clearly surprises Victoria. "Would you like to practice more counting games sometime?" Ethan doesn't answer verbally, but he takes 3 deliberate steps toward them, the first time he's moved closer to strangers rather than away. It's a tiny gesture, but Robert reads it clearly. Interest. Willingness. Maybe even the beginning of trust. Victoria sees it too, and the hope that floods her face is almost painful in its intensity. "Please," she says simply, "let me give you the resources to help him, and help yourself in the process." Robert looks down at Lucy, who's been following the conversation with the remarkable perception of children who've learned to read adult emotions for survival. She nods almost imperceptibly, not understanding the full implications, but trusting her father's judgment about helping other kids the way he helps her. And one condition, Robert says finally. "This isn't about fixing Ethan, it's about learning to communicate with him. The goal isn't to make him talk like other kids, it's to help him find his own voice, whatever that looks like." And Victoria nods immediately, but Robert wonders if she truly understands the distinction, or if she's simply agreeing to whatever terms will secure his help for her son. What neither of them realizes is that this agreement will challenge every assumption they have about family, communication, and what it means to truly understand another person. The countdown that helped Ethan transition from the sandbox was just the beginning of a much longer journey toward connection. Robert Miller stands in the gleaming lobby of Lancaster Tower, Lucy's small hand gripping his own as they both crane their necks to take in the soaring glass ceiling 40 stories above. The marble floors reflect their images. A man in his cleanest jeans and a button-down shirt he ironed twice this morning, beside a 7-year-old girl whose best dress still shows a small stain from breakfast. They look exactly like what they are, working-class visitors in a world built for entirely different people. "Mr. Miller?" A woman in a crisp navy suit approaches, her smile professional but warm. "I'm Jennifer Walsh, Ms. Lancaster's executive assistant. She's waiting for you on the 52nd floor." NTHE elevator ride passes in relative silence, Lucy pressed against Robert's side as they watch the digital numbers climb higher than either of them has ever been. Through the glass walls, the city of Millbrook spreads out below them like a detailed map. The community center playground, where they met Victoria, now invisible among the geometric patterns of suburban development. "Daddy," Lucy whispers, her hands moving in subtle sign language. "Are we going to live here?" Robert squeezes her hand reassuringly. "No, sweetheart. Ms. Lancaster just wants to talk about helping Ethan learn to communicate better. Like when we practiced with Mrs. Chen's grandson last year, remember?" NBUT, even as he says it, Robert feels the inadequacy of the comparison. Mrs. Chen had been their elderly neighbor, whose grandson visited summers, struggling with English as a second language. This, the private elevator, the assistant who probably earns more than Robert's annual income, the casual mention of flying in Swiss specialists, this operates on a completely different scale. NTHE elevator opens into what can only be described as a corner office that takes up half the floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows offer panoramic views of the city, while modern art that Robert recognizes from Lucy's museum picture books hangs on walls the color of expensive coffee. Victoria Lancaster stands with her back to them, speaking quietly into a wireless headset while studying what appears to be architectural plans spread across a conference table. "Reschedule the Tokyo call for 8 a.m. tomorrow," she's saying, her voice carrying the crisp authority Robert remembers from the playground, but amplified by the professional setting. "And tell Harrison the merger documents need revision before I'll sign anything." NSHE turns as they enter, and Robert notices how seamlessly she transitions from corporate executive to concerned mother. The headset disappears into a desk drawer, the business papers are quickly gathered, and her entire posture shifts to become more approachable. "And Robert, Lucy, thank you for coming." Victoria kneels to Lucy's eye level, a gesture that surprises Robert with its naturalness. "Ethan's been asking about you all week." "Well, not asking exactly, but he's been arranging his toys in the same pattern you taught him at the playground." Lucy beams at this information, her natural empathy immediately engaged. "Can we show him more patterns? Daddy taught me about tessellations. That's when shapes fit together perfectly with no gaps. I'd love to see that," Victoria says, and Robert can hear genuine interest beneath the polite response. She leads them to a seating area that probably costs more than Robert's monthly rent. Leather couches arranged around a coffee table that looks like a piece of abstract sculpture. Before we discuss the details, Victoria begins, settling across from them with a leather portfolio in her hands. I need you to understand what you'd be walking into. Ethan's case isn't straightforward. We've documented everything over the past 3 years. Every specialist, every approach, every small success and major setback. NSHE opens the portfolio to reveal a thick stack of reports, medical evaluations, and therapy notes. Robert recognizes the familiar clinical language of his former profession, but the sheer volume is staggering. Ethan's autism has been analyzed, categorized, and documented by what appears to be dozens of experts. Severe expressive language delays, Victoria reads from one report. Possible auditory processing challenges. Significant resistance to traditional intervention methods. The consensus seems to be that Ethan may never develop functional verbal communication. Robert accepts the portfolio, scanning through evaluations that reduce a bright, observant child to a collection of deficits and limitations. He's seen this before, the way institutional medicine sometimes focuses so intently on what's wrong that it misses what's uniquely right about each child. What do you think? He asks, looking up from the papers. Not what the experts say, but what you think about your son's potential. Victoria's composure wavers slightly. I think he understands everything. I think he has thoughts and feelings and opinions that he can't express, and it frustrates him as much as it breaks my heart. I think those specialists see a problem to be solved, but I see my child trapped behind barriers that no one seems able to break through. NTHE raw honesty in her answer tells Robert more about Ethan's potential than all the clinical reports combined. He closes the portfolio and sets it aside. The playground interaction suggests he's ready to communicate. He just needs someone to meet him in his own language first. Which brings us to the practical arrangements, Victoria says, shifting back toward business mode. I've prepared a comprehensive offer that I hope addresses all your concerns about stability and support. NSHE slides a sealed envelope across the coffee table. Your salary would be $200,000 annually, with full medical and dental coverage for both you and Lucy. There's also an education fund for Lucy's future schooling, including any specialized services she might need for her hearing difficulties. Robert's hand still on the envelope. The number she's mentioned represents more money than he's earned in the past 3 years combined. Lucy's hearing aids, her potential need for college support, the constant stress of choosing between rent and groceries, all of it could disappear with this single decision. There's more. Victoria continues, her voice gentle but businesslike. I've identified a house in Brookfield Heights, about 20 minutes from here. 3 bedrooms, excellent school district, fully accessible features for Lucy's needs. I'd like to provide it as part of the compensation package. You want to buy us a house? Robert asks, the magnitude of the offer finally sinking in. I want to remove the barriers that prevent you from focusing entirely on helping Ethan. Victoria clarifies. Housing insecurity, financial stress, inadequate medical coverage. These things divide your attention and energy. Ethan needs someone who can be fully present for his development. Lucy tugs on Robert's sleeve, her expression showing she's followed enough of the conversation to understand its significance. Daddy, would we have our own house, like before Mommy got sick? NTHE innocence in her question hits Robert like a physical blow. Since Emma's death, they've moved 3 times, always to smaller, cheaper spaces, always one step ahead of bills they couldn't quite manage. The idea of stability, of Lucy having her own room again, of not calculating the cost of every grocery item, it's almost too large to process. This is incredibly generous. Robert says slowly, but I need to understand the expectations. What exactly would my role be with Ethan? Victoria leans forward, her executive persona giving way to something more vulnerable. I need you to do what you did at the playground, but consistently. Help him find ways to communicate. Not necessarily verbal communication. I've learned that expecting him to be like other children isn't fair to who he is. But some way for him to share what's inside his mind. NSHE pauses, her fingers twisting the diamond wedding ring she still wears despite being obviously single. Ethan's father left when the diagnosis became clear. He said he couldn't handle raising a defective child, so it's been just us, and honestly, I'm failing him. I can provide him with every material advantage, but I can't give him what you gave him in 15 minutes at a playground. Robert studies Victoria's face, reading the exhaustion and determination there. He recognizes the particular desperation of a parent who's run out of conventional options. But he also sees something else: genuine love for her son, uncomplicated by the need to fix or change him. "And I have conditions," Robert says finally. First, Ethan participates in setting his own goals. We work with his interests and strengths, not against them. Second, progress gets measured by his comfort and happiness, not by how closely he approximates typical communication patterns. Agreed, Victoria says immediately. Third, Lucy comes with me. She's part of how I work. And honestly, I think Ethan responds to her differently than he does to adults. And Victoria glances at Lucy, who's been quietly examining the geometric patterns in the office carpet. Actually, I was hoping you'd say that. Ethan needs to learn social interaction with peers, not just adults. Lucy could be invaluable. Robert opens the envelope, scanning the formal contract language that makes their conversation legally binding. The numbers are real, the offer comprehensive, the opportunity life-changing. But underneath his relief about Lucy's future security, he feels a familiar wariness about institutional approaches to children's development. "When would you want to start?" he asks. "Tomorrow, if possible. I've arranged for Ethan to spend mornings working with you in a space I've set up at our house. Afternoons, he'd continue with his regular school program, but the intensive communication work would be your domain entirely." Robert looks at Lucy, who nods with the solemn understanding of a child who's learned to trust her father's judgment about helping other kids. The decision feels simultaneously inevitable and surreal. A chance to return to the work he loves while providing Lucy with opportunities he could never offer alone. "Okay," he says, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he's agreeing to. "Let's help Ethan find his voice." What Robert doesn't realize is that accepting Victoria Lancaster's offer will eventually force him to confront questions about family, identity, and belonging that he's been avoiding since Emma's death. The professional relationship he's agreeing to will become something far more complex than either of them currently imagines. The Lancaster estate sits behind iron gates in Millbrook's most exclusive neighborhood, where manicured lawns stretch like green carpets between houses that could hold Robert's entire apartment building. As their taxi winds up the circular driveway, Lucy presses her face to the window, her breath fogging the glass as she takes in the sprawling Tudor-style mansion that will be their workplace for the foreseeable future. "It's like a castle," she whispers in sign language, her hands moving in quick, excited gestures. Robert shares her amazement, though his runs deeper than architectural appreciation. The house represents wealth on a scale he's never personally encountered, not just money, but the kind of generational affluence that shapes entire family legacies. Swimming pools, tennis courts, gardens that probably require a full-time staff to maintain. Victoria Lancaster doesn't just live comfortably, she inhabits a completely different economic reality. NTHE front door opens before they can knock, revealing Victoria in casual clothes that somehow still manage to look expensive. Dark jeans that fit perfectly, a cream-colored sweater that probably costs more than Robert's monthly grocery budget, understated jewelry that catches the morning light. Even dressed down, she carries herself with the unconscious confidence of someone who's never had to worry about basic necessities. "Good morning," she says, her smile warm but with an edge of nervous energy. Ethan's been awake since 5:30 arranging his toys. I think he's excited, though he shows it differently than most children. NSHE leads them through a foyer with cathedral ceilings and a chandelier that seems to contain more crystal than Robert has ever seen in one place. The walls display family photographs, Victoria at various corporate events, charity galas, business conferences. But scattered among the professional shots are candid pictures of Ethan, building elaborate block structures, examining leaves with intense concentration, sitting peacefully in gardens that look like museum displays. "I've converted the sunroom into a communication space," Victoria explains as they walk through rooms that flow seamlessly from one to another. "I consulted with 3 different child development specialists about the optimal environment: natural lighting, minimal sensory distractions, flexible furniture that can be rearranged as needed." NTHE sunroom takes Robert's breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlook perfectly landscaped gardens, while the interior contains every educational tool he's ever dreamed of having in a therapy space. Communication boards with hundreds of symbols, textured materials organized by sensory properties, musical instruments arranged by tone and complexity, building materials sorted by size and function. It's like someone took his wish list from his hospital days and brought it to life with unlimited resources. Ethan sits in the center of this pedagogical wonderland, completely absorbed in arranging colored blocks according to some pattern only he understands. He's wearing clothes that clearly come from expensive children's boutiques, a navy sweater and khaki pants that look like miniature versions of adult professional wear. His blonde hair is perfectly combed, his shoes spotless, every detail of his appearance carefully curated. "Ethan," Victoria says softly, "Robert and Lucy are here to visit." The boy looks up, and Robert sees immediate recognition in his blue eyes. Ethan doesn't smile or wave, but his hands pause in their block arrangement, a small acknowledgement that registers the change in his environment. Lucy waves enthusiastically, her natural warmth undampened by the formal grandeur of their surroundings. "Can we see your pattern?" Robert asks, settling cross-legged on the floor near Ethan's workspace. Lucy loves patterns too. She's learning about tessellations in school. Ethan's gaze shifts between Robert's face and the blocks. Then he carefully moves one red block to create a gap in his arrangement. The gesture seems deliberate, intentional, an invitation for interaction that surprises Victoria with its spontaneity. Lucy immediately understands, pulling out her school notebook to show Ethan her tessellation drawings. "See how the triangles fit together with no spaces?" she explains, her fingers tracing the geometric patterns. "Every piece has a place where it belongs perfectly." And to everyone's amazement, Ethan reaches for a pencil and begins drawing on the edge of Lucy's notebook. His lines are precise, confident, creating mathematical patterns that are far more complex than anything a typical 5-year-old could conceptualize. Robert recognizes advanced geometric thinking, the kind of spatial intelligence that often accompanies autism, but gets overlooked when focusing solely on verbal communication deficits. He's been doing mathematical drawing since he was 3, Victoria explains, settling into a nearby chair that probably costs more than Robert's monthly salary. "I've shown them to several child psychologists, but they keep focusing on his lack of speech rather than his obvious intellectual gifts." Robert studies Ethan's drawings, seeing not just mathematical ability, but communication in its purest form. "This is language," he says quietly. "It's not verbal, but it's sophisticated symbolic representation." He's showing Lucy how patterns work in his mind. If responding to Robert's recognition, Ethan looks up and makes direct eye contact. Something Victoria mentions happens rarely with strangers. The boy's expression carries that ancient wisdom Robert noticed at the playground. But now he sees something else. Curiosity. Interest in whether these new people will understand his unique way of engaging with the world. "Lucy, would you like to try drawing one of Ethan's patterns?" Robert suggests, recognizing an opportunity for peer-to-peer connection that often works better than adult-directed interaction. Children bend over the notebook together, Ethan's pencil moving in careful strokes, while Lucy watches with fascination. They don't speak. Lucy respects Ethan's nonverbal communication style while Ethan seems intrigued by her patient attention to his mathematical expressions. Victoria watches this interaction with an intensity that makes Robert glance at her curiously. Her entire posture communicates desperate hope barely held in check. The particular tension of a parent who's witnessed too many failed attempts at connection to trust easily in success. "How many specialists have worked with him?" Robert asks quietly, not wanting to interrupt the children's collaborative drawing. Then 17, Victoria answers without hesitation. "Speech therapists, occupational therapists, behavioral specialists, developmental pediatricians. We've tried ABA therapy, PECS communication systems, music therapy, even experimental programs at Johns Hopkins and UCLA NSHE." Pulls out a tablet, scrolling through what appears to be detailed documentation of every intervention attempt. "I've kept records of everything, what worked, what didn't, what triggered negative responses. Most specialists lasted about 6 weeks before deciding Ethan was too challenging for their methods." Robert scans the notes, recognizing the clinical language of his former profession. But he also sees the pattern that Victoria might be missing. Every approach has focused on changing Ethan rather than understanding him. The goal has consistently been to make him communicate like a neurotypical child rather than developing his existing communication strengths. What if we approached this differently? Robert suggests. Instead of teaching Ethan to communicate like other children, What if we helped other people learn to communicate with him? Victoria's fingers pause on the tablet screen. What do you mean? Look at what's happening right now. Robert gestures toward the children, who are now creating increasingly elaborate geometric patterns together. Ethan is communicating perfectly. Through mathematics, through spatial relationships, through visual representation. Lucy is learning his language instead of forcing him to use hers. If to illustrate Robert's point, Ethan suddenly looks up at Lucy and points to her hearing aids. His expression carries obvious curiosity, but instead of the intrusive staring that often makes Lucy uncomfortable, his attention seems genuinely interested in understanding how her world works. Lucy touches her hearing aids matter-of-factly. They help me hear better, she explains simply. Some sounds are hard for my ears to catch, so these make them louder and clearer. Ethan nods as if this explanation makes perfect sense, then returns to their drawing with renewed focus. Robert realizes that Ethan recognizes Lucy as someone else who processes the world differently, a peer rather than an adult trying to fix him. I've never seen him connect with another child like this, Victoria says, her voice catching slightly. The specialists always said he lacked social motivation, that peer interaction was beyond his developmental level. Maybe he just needed the right peer, Robert observes. Lucy doesn't expect him to be anyone other than who he is. She's interested in his patterns because they're beautiful, not because she wants to change them into something else. Victoria's phone buzzes with what sounds like an urgent notification, but she doesn't even glance at it. Her entire attention remains focused on watching her son engage in natural, unforced interaction with another child. Mr. Miller, she says quietly, I need to tell you something about my expectations for this arrangement. Robert feels a familiar tension, recognizing the tone that usually precedes difficult conversations about goals and timelines. I'm listening. Every specialist I've hired has promised measurable progress within specific timeframes. Verbal communication within 6 months. Social integration within a year. Academic performance meeting age-appropriate standards. They've all had elaborate plans and evidence-based methodologies. NSHE pauses, watching Ethan show Lucy how to create a particular geometric intersection. But watching this, seeing him choose to share his interest with someone, this is the first time I've understood that maybe the problem isn't Ethan's inability to communicate. Maybe the problem is everyone else's inability to understand the language he's already using. Robert feels something shift in their arrangement, a recognition that Victoria might be a different kind of parent than the demanding executive he'd initially worried about. But he also senses complexity in her situation that goes beyond simple parental concern. And there's something else, Victoria continues, her voice dropping even lower. Lancaster Industries has major investors, board members, corporate partners, who know about Ethan's diagnosis. There's pressure, not just from me, but from people who see his success or failure as a reflection of the company's competence. NTHE revelation hits Robert like cold water. Ethan's development isn't just personal for Victoria, it's corporate, professional, public. The boy's progress will be measured not just by loving parents, but by business associates who view autism as a liability to be overcome. That's a lot of pressure to put on a 5-year-old, Robert says carefully. It's a lot of pressure to put on everyone involved. Victoria agrees, meeting his eyes directly. I need you to understand what you're walking into. This isn't just about helping one child find his voice. It's about proving that different ways of being in the world can be valuable, not just tolerated. Robert looks at the children, still absorbed in their collaborative art, oblivious to the adult complexities surrounding their simple connection. Ethan's mathematical patterns and Lucy's patient acceptance have created something beautiful together, exactly the kind of communication breakthrough that can't be forced or scheduled. NBUT now he understands that their work together will be scrutinized by people who measure success in conventional terms, people who want Ethan to become indistinguishable from typical children rather than celebrating his unique strengths. NTHE Sunroom, with all its expensive resources and carefully designed learning environment, suddenly feels less like a sanctuary, and 3 weeks into their new arrangement, Robert arrives at the Lancaster estate to find Victoria pacing in the foyer, her phone pressed to her ear, and her usually composed demeanor showing visible cracks. Her voice carries the sharp edge of someone accustomed to controlling situations that have suddenly spiraled beyond her influence. No, Charles, I understand the board's concerns, but Ethan is not a quarterly report, she's saying, her free hand gesturing emphatically despite being on a voice call. His development can't be measured in traditional metrics. NSHE notices Robert and Lucy entering, but holds up one finger, continuing her conversation with increasing intensity. The stakeholder meeting is next month, and yes, they'll want to see progress, but we can't manufacture breakthroughs on a corporate timeline. Lucy tugs on Robert's sleeve, her expression concerned. She's learned to read adult tension with the acute sensitivity of a child who's navigated loss and uncertainty. Through the open doorway of the sunroom, they can see Ethan sitting in his usual spot. But something is different about his positioning. Instead of the relaxed focus they've come to expect, his posture appears rigid, defensive. "I have to go," Victoria says into the phone, her voice clipped. "We'll continue this discussion at the board meeting." She ends the call and turns to them, her professional mask slipping enough to reveal the exhaustion underneath. "And I apologize for that," she says, running her hand through her perfectly styled hair. The corporate side of things is getting complicated. And Robert sets down his bag, filled with the low-tech communication tools he's found most effective with Ethan. Textured fabric squares, simple musical instruments, picture cards they've created together. These homemade materials contrast sharply with the expensive equipment filling the sunroom, but they've proven far more useful for building genuine connection. "Man, what kind of complications?" Robert asks, though he suspects he already knows. In his experience, when adults start talking about progress and timelines, children inevitably sense the pressure and respond by retreating into themselves. Victoria glances toward the sunroom, then lowers her voice. Lancaster Industries is a publicly traded company. The board members aren't just business associates. They're investors, stockholders, people whose financial interests depend on public confidence in the company's leadership. NSHE moves toward the kitchen, gesturing for them to follow. The space continues the theme of understated luxury: marble countertops, professional-grade appliances, fresh flowers that probably cost more than Robert's weekly grocery budget. But despite its magazine-worthy appearance, the kitchen feels sterile, unused, like a showroom rather than a place where families actually gather. "Charles Whitman is our largest single investor," Victoria continues, pulling out a leather portfolio that appears identical to the one she'd shown Robert during their first meeting. "He's also old-fashioned in his views about children with disabilities. He thinks Ethan's autism reflects poorly on my judgment and decision-making capabilities." Lucy has wandered over to peer through the doorway at Ethan, who hasn't acknowledged their arrival with his usual subtle head turn. Robert recognizes the signs: a child who's picked up on adult anxiety and responded by withdrawing into himself. What exactly is Whitman expecting to see? Robert asks, accepting the coffee Victoria offers from a machine that probably costs more than his monthly rent. Conventional communication milestones. Victoria admits, her voice tight with frustration. Verbal responses to questions, appropriate social interactions, evidence that Ethan can function in typical educational and social environments. Robert feels his stomach tighten with familiar anger at the ways institutional thinking reduces complex children to simple checklists. And if he doesn't demonstrate those specific behaviors? Victoria's silence stretches long enough to answer his question. Finally, she opens the portfolio to reveal financial documents, legal papers, corporate organizational charts. Whitman has been building support among other board members for a leadership review. He's suggesting that my personal challenges with Ethan indicate I'm not equipped to make sound business decisions for the company. NTHE implications hit Robert with sudden clarity. Victoria's position as CEO, her entire professional identity, depends on proving that her autistic son can be made to appear neurotypical according to arbitrary standards set by people who've never spent a day understanding autism. "This isn't about Ethan's development anymore," Robert says quietly. "This is about corporate politics using a 5-year-old child as ammunition." "Exactly," Victoria agrees, her composure finally cracking completely. "And the worst part is, Ethan knows something's wrong. He's been different this week, more withdrawn, less responsive to our usual activities. I think he can sense my stress, even though I've tried to keep business concerns separate from our time together." From the sunroom comes the sound of blocks falling, not the careful placement they've grown accustomed to, but the frustrated crash of materials being knocked over. Lucy appears in the kitchen doorway, her expression worried. "Ethan's throwing his blocks," she reports in sign language. "He looks sad." Robert immediately heads toward the sunroom, Victoria close behind him. They find Ethan sitting amid scattered blocks, his hands covering his ears in a gesture Robert recognizes as sensory overload. The boy's usual calm has been replaced by obvious distress, his entire body radiating the particular anxiety that comes from feeling expected to perform beyond one's natural capabilities. "Hey, buddy," Robert says softly, settling onto the floor at a respectful distance. "Looks like the blocks aren't cooperating today." Nathan doesn't respond, but his hands lower slightly, revealing eyes that look suspiciously bright with unshed tears. Robert has seen this before. Children who understand far more than adults give them credit for, picking up on parental stress and internalizing it as their own failure. Lucy joins them on the floor, ignoring the scattered blocks to pull out her notebook. She begins drawing simple geometric shapes, her movements deliberately calm and predictable. Slowly, Ethan's breathing begins to regulate, his attention drawn to the familiar comfort of mathematical patterns. "Nathan," Robert says gently, "have grown-ups been acting worried lately? Sometimes adults get stressed about things that aren't your responsibility." Into his surprise, Ethan nods, a clear, deliberate response that makes Victoria draw in a sharp breath. It's the most direct communication he's offered since their work together began. "That's hard," Robert acknowledges. "When adults are worried, kids often think it's their job to fix things. But your job is just to be yourself. The grown-up worries belong to grown-ups." Nathan looks directly at Robert, then at his mother, his expression carrying a wisdom that seems far beyond his 5 years. Victoria kneels beside them, her expensive clothes forgotten as she reaches toward her son. "And sweetheart, I'm sorry," she says, her voice thick with emotion. "I didn't realize you could tell I was stressed. That's not your problem to solve." NFOR a moment. The sunroom is completely quiet except for the soft sound of Lucy's pencil moving across paper. Then Ethan reaches out and touches one of the fallen blocks, rolling it toward Robert in what appears to be an invitation to rebuild together. "Actually," Victoria says suddenly, her voice taking on a different quality, stronger, more decisive, "I think I've been approaching this entire situation wrong." NSHE stands up, her posture shifting back into the executive confidence Robert has learned to recognize. Charles Whitman and the board want to see conventional progress from Ethan, but maybe it's time they learn to recognize different kinds of success. Robert looks up from the blocks he's beginning to sort with Ethan. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I've been letting other people define what progress looks like for my son," Victoria says, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I've been so focused on proving Ethan can meet neurotypical standards that I've lost sight of celebrating the incredible things he can already do." NSHE pulls out her phone, but instead of checking corporate messages, she opens the camera function. "Would you mind if I documented some of our session today? Not for the board, but for me. I want to start keeping track of the real victories, the moments when Ethan connects, communicates, and demonstrates his unique intelligence." Robert nods, understanding that Victoria is beginning to separate her role as a mother from her obligations as a CEO. But he also senses that this shift in perspective is about to create even larger conflicts, with the corporate forces pressuring her to produce conventional results. Ethan, meanwhile, has begun rebuilding his block structure with renewed focus. This time, however, he deliberately leaves spaces, gaps where other blocks could fit if someone wanted to join his construction. Lucy immediately recognizes the invitation, adding her own blocks to create a collaborative structure that's more complex and beautiful than anything either child could have built alone. Victoria captures this interaction on her phone, and Robert sees her face transform as she watches her son engage in the exact kind of social communication the specialists claimed he couldn't achieve. The difference is that Ethan is communicating on his own terms, in his own language, with someone who meets him where he is rather than demanding he change to accommodate their expectations. The board meeting is in 2 weeks. Victoria says quietly, still filming the children's collaborative building. "Whitman is expecting me to present evidence that Ethan has made measurable progress toward conventional communication goals." Robert feels the weight of institutional pressure settling over their peaceful workspace like a storm cloud. The natural, unforced development he's been nurturing with Ethan will soon be subjected to evaluation by people who measure success in terms that have nothing to do with authentic communication or genuine connection. What happens if Ethan doesn't perform the way they expect? Robert asks, though he's not sure he wants to hear the answer. Victoria's hands still on her phone, her attention shifting between the children building together and the corporate demands waiting beyond the sunroom's peaceful walls. "Then I'll have to choose between my son's well-being and my career," she says simply. And honestly, that choice is becoming clearer every day. NBUT Robert senses that the upcoming board meeting will test not just Victoria's commitment to accepting Ethan as he is, but also the strength of the unexpected bond that's been growing between their two families over the past few weeks. NTHE morning of the board meeting arrives with an unseasonable thunderstorm that rattles the windows of the Lancaster mansion, as if the weather itself reflects the tension building inside. Robert arrives to find Victoria in her study, surrounded by presentation boards displaying before and after photos of Ethan's block constructions, mathematical drawings, and collaborative projects with Lucy. She's wearing her most authoritative business suit, navy blue with sharp lines that seem designed to project competence and control. "I've been up since 4 preparing," Victoria admits, gesturing to the elaborate display that transforms her son's natural development into corporate-friendly visual aids. "I keep trying to find ways to make Ethan's progress look impressive to people who don't understand what they're seeing." Robert studies the presentation materials, recognizing his own documentation photos repurposed for boardroom consumption. Ethan's spontaneous mathematical drawings have been mounted and labeled with clinical terminology. Lucy and Ethan's collaborative play sessions are described in language that emphasizes peer interaction milestones and social communication breakthroughs. "This feels wrong," Robert says quietly, running his finger along the edge of a poster that reduces Ethan's beautiful geometric thinking to evidence of cognitive flexibility improvement. "I know," Victoria replies, her voice tight with frustration. "But I speak their language fluently, and they don't speak his at all. If I want to protect our arrangement, protect the progress he's actually making, I have to translate it into terms that make sense to them." Through the study's open door, they can hear Ethan and Lucy in the sunroom, engaged in their morning ritual of creating increasingly complex patterns with various materials. Their collaboration has evolved into something entirely natural, Lucy providing steady encouragement, while Ethan demonstrates mathematical concepts that amaze Robert with their sophistication. The irony is that Ethan has made incredible progress. Victoria continues, checking her phone for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. Just not the kind Charles Whitman considers valuable. NSHE pulls up a video on her tablet, showing Ethan from their first playground meeting compared to yesterday's session, where he spent 20 minutes teaching Lucy about geometric tessellations through patient demonstration and gentle guidance. The transformation is remarkable, from a withdrawn child overwhelmed by interaction to someone actively sharing his interests with a peer. "But he still doesn't speak," Victoria says, voicing the concern that underlies all her corporate anxiety, "and that's what they'll focus on. 3 months of intensive intervention, and my son still hasn't said, 'Mama,' or answered a direct question verbally." Robert feels anger rising in his chest, not at Victoria, but at the system that measures a child's worth by arbitrary standards that have nothing to do with intelligence, creativity, or genuine communication. What if we're asking the wrong questions entirely? What do you mean? What if instead of asking why Ethan doesn't speak like other children, we ask why other people don't recognize the sophisticated ways he already communicates? Robert gestures toward the sunroom. He's teaching Lucy advanced mathematical concepts through visual demonstration. He's showing empathy by creating patterns that include spaces for her contributions. He's displaying patience, creativity, and social awareness that most adults struggle with. Victoria's phone buzzes with a text message that makes her expression tighten further. "Charles is arriving early," she reports. "He wants to observe a typical therapy session before the formal presentation." NTHE implications of this development settle over them like the storm clouds gathering outside. Charles Whitman isn't just coming to review data and documentation. He's planning to evaluate Ethan in person, to judge the child's worth according to criteria that have nothing to do with understanding autism or appreciating neurodiversity. "And we should cancel today's session," Robert says immediately. Ethan doesn't perform well under observation pressure, especially from strangers with agenda. "I can't cancel," Victoria replies, her voice carrying the strain of someone caught between competing loyalties. "If I refuse to let Charles observe, he'll interpret it as hiding Ethan's lack of progress. But if Ethan shuts down under scrutiny, Charles will see it as evidence that the intervention isn't working." From the sunroom comes the sound of Lucy's delighted laughter, as Ethan demonstrates something that apparently amazes her. Their natural interaction represents everything Robert has been trying to nurture: authentic communication, mutual respect, genuine connection between two children who understand each other's unique ways of processing the world. There has to be another way. Robert insists. Some middle ground that protects Ethan while satisfying corporate requirements. Victoria moves to the window, watching the storm intensify outside. Her reflection in the glass shows the particular exhaustion of a parent forced to defend her child's existence to people who view differences as deficits to be corrected. "And Robert," she says quietly, "there's something I haven't told you about Charles Whitman's visit today." Robert feels his stomach tighten with anticipation of additional complications. "He's not coming alone," Victoria continues. "He's bringing Dr. Margaret Thornfield, a behavioral specialist who runs one of those intensive early intervention programs that claim to make autistic children indistinguishable from their peers." NTHE name hits Robert like a physical blow. He knows Dr. Thornfield's reputation, a practitioner of outdated methods that focus on compliance training rather than genuine communication development. Her programs are notorious for breaking down children's natural coping mechanisms in favor of forced eye contact, suppressed stimming, and performative social behaviors that create anxiety rather than authentic connection. "And Victoria, you can't let her evaluate Ethan," Robert says, his professional alarm overriding diplomatic courtesy. "Her methods are exactly the opposite of everything we've been building. She'll see his mathematical thinking as obsessive behavior and his careful social interactions as failure to engage appropriately." "And I know," Victoria admits, her reflection showing tears she's been holding back. "But Charles has convinced other board members that if Ethan can't demonstrate normal, social responses, it proves I'm not making sound decisions for the company." Dr. Thornfield represents their idea of expert evaluation. NTHE sound of a car door slamming cuts through the storm noise, followed by the doorbell's formal chime. Victoria straightens her shoulders, her corporate armor sliding into place as she prepares to defend her son to people who see him as a problem requiring institutional solutions. "What do we do?" she asks, and Robert hears in her voice the vulnerability of a parent who's run out of options. From the sunroom, Ethan's voice suddenly rings out, not words, but a series of melodic tones that Robert recognizes as his way of expressing contentment and focus. Lucy responds with her own musical sounds, and together they create a conversation in pure tone that demonstrates more sophisticated communication than most verbal exchanges. We let them see who Ethan really is, Robert decides, his voice gaining strength as the plan crystallizes in his mind. Not what they expect him to be, but who he actually is. A brilliant, creative, communicative child who just happens to speak a different language than they're used to hearing. Victoria turns from the window, hope and terror warring in her expression. "And if they don't understand his language, then we teach them," Robert says simply. "The same way Lucy learned. Through patience, observation, and respect for different ways of being in the world." NTHE doorbell rings again, more insistently this time, and Victoria moves toward the foyer to greet visitors who will judge her son according to standards that have nothing to do with his actual capabilities or worth as a human being. NBUT as they leave the study, Robert catches Victoria's arm gently. "Remember," he says quietly, "Ethan doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. He's perfect exactly as he is. The question isn't whether he can meet their expectations, it's whether they're capable of recognizing his value." Victoria nods, squaring her shoulders as she prepares to walk into a conversation that will determine not just her professional future, but the direction of her son's development and the preservation of the authentic progress they've been nurturing together. In the sunroom, Ethan and Lucy continue their musical conversation, completely unaware that their natural communication is about to be subjected to evaluation by adults who measure success in terms that have nothing to do with the beauty. Charles Whitman enters the Lancaster foyer like a storm front, his presence immediately shifting the atmosphere of the entire house. Tall, silver-haired, and wearing a suit that probably costs more than Robert's annual income, he carries himself with the unconscious authority of someone accustomed to having his opinions treated as unquestionable facts. Behind him follows Dr. Margaret Thornfield, a woman in her 60s whose clinical demeanor and sharp gray suit suggests someone who views children as puzzles to be solved rather than people to be understood. And Victoria. Charles says, his tone carrying the particular condescension of someone who believes he's about to deliver necessary but unpleasant truths. "I appreciate you accommodating this observation session on such short notice. NDR." Thornfield is already scanning the house with professional assessment, her gaze taking in details that Robert suspects she'll later use to critique everything from parenting styles to therapeutic approaches. Her eyes linger on the family photographs, the expensive but child-friendly furniture, the subtle accommodations Victoria has made throughout the house to support Ethan's sensory needs. "Mr. Whitman, Dr. Thornfield." Victoria responds, her voice maintaining perfect professional courtesy despite the obvious tension in her posture. "I'd like you to meet Robert Miller, Ethan's communication specialist, and his daughter Lucy, who's been an invaluable part of Ethan's social development." Robert extends his hand, noting how Charles's grip is designed to establish dominance while Dr. Thornfield's assessment focuses immediately on Lucy's hearing aids with the clinical interest of someone cataloging potential complications. "Interesting approach." Dr. Thornfield comments, her tone suggesting the opposite of approval. "Using another disabled child as a peer model isn't typically recommended in evidence-based intervention protocols." NTHE casual dismissal of Lucy as merely a disabled child, rather than recognizing her as the intelligent, empathetic person she is, makes Robert's jaw tighten with controlled anger. Beside him, Lucy's hand finds his, her small fingers squeezing in the pattern they use when adults say things that make her feel reduced to her differences rather than celebrated for her whole self. Lucy has been instrumental in helping Ethan develop natural peer communication, Robert explains, his voice remaining professional despite his internal reaction. Their interactions demonstrate authentic social connection that can't be replicated through adult-directed interventions. Charles waves dismissively, his attention already moving toward the sunroom where they can hear the soft sounds of Ethan and Lucy's continuing musical conversation. "Yes, well, let's see what 3 months of expensive private intervention has actually produced, shall we?" As they move through the house, Dr. Thornfield pulls out a tablet and begins making notes with the rapid efficiency of someone conducting a formal evaluation. Robert recognizes the checklist mentality that reduces complex children to series of deficits and behavioral targets. NTHE's sunroom falls silent as the group enters, Ethan's natural sensitivity to environmental changes immediately picking up on the new energy in the space. He doesn't look up from his current project, an elaborate three-dimensional structure built from blocks, fabric pieces, and musical instruments that demonstrates advanced spatial reasoning and aesthetic sensibility. "And Ethan," Victoria says gently, "we have some visitors who'd like to see the wonderful things you've been creating." Ethan's hands still completely, his body language shifting from relaxed focus to rigid alertness. Robert recognizes the signs of a child sensing evaluation pressure and preparing to shut down rather than perform on demand. NDR. Thornfield immediately begins her assessment, speaking about Ethan as if he weren't present. No eye contact with new adults, no acknowledgement of social greeting, complete absorption in repetitive play activities. These are classic indicators of significant social communication deficits. Actually, Robert interjects carefully, Ethan is demonstrating sophisticated environmental awareness. He's processing the change in social dynamics and choosing how to respond rather than reacting impulsively. Charles snorts dismissively. "That's therapeutic spin, Miller." The boy is obviously unresponsive to basic social cues. Lucy, who has been observing the adult interaction with growing concern, moves closer to Ethan and begins softly humming one of the melodies they've developed together. Ethan's posture immediately relaxes, and he glances at her with obvious gratitude before returning his attention to his construction. Inappropriate peer interaction. Dr. Thornfield notes aloud while typing on her tablet. Both children showing signs of social avoidance rather than typical playground engagement. They're communicating through music, Robert explains, his professional patience beginning to strain. It's a sophisticated form of emotional regulation and social connection that they've developed organically. NDR. Thornfield looks up from her tablet with the expression of someone explaining basic facts to a confused amateur. "Mr. Miller, humming isn't communication. It's self-stimulatory behavior that prevents these children from developing appropriate social skills." NTHE casual dismissal of Ethan and Lucy's beautiful, complex interaction as mere self-stimulatory behavior creates a moment of crystalline clarity for Robert. These people aren't here to understand Ethan. They're here to confirm their pre-existing beliefs about what constitutes valuable human communication. "Ethan," Charles says suddenly, his voice carrying the commanding tone of someone unaccustomed to being ignored. "Look at me when I'm speaking to you." NTHE direct demand has an immediate effect. Ethan's entire body tenses, his hands moving to cover his ears in the gesture Robert recognizes as sensory overload. The natural, peaceful atmosphere of the sunroom fractures under the weight of forced interaction expectations. There we have it. Dr. Thornfield says with satisfaction, as if Ethan's distress proves her point. Complete inability to respond to basic social directives. This child needs intensive behavioral intervention to develop compliance with adult instructions. He's overwhelmed, Robert says firmly, moving to create a buffer between Ethan and the evaluating adults. He is responding to environmental stress, not demonstrating communication deficits. NBUT Charles has apparently seen enough. Victoria, this is exactly what I was afraid of. 3 months of expensive intervention, and your son still can't make eye contact or follow simple directions. Dr. Thornfield, what would you recommend? NDR. Thornfield closes her tablet with the finality of someone delivering a diagnosis. Immediate enrollment in our intensive early intervention program. 40 hours per week of structured behavioral therapy designed to eliminate these maladaptive responses and replace them with socially appropriate behaviors. 40 hours per week? Victoria's voice carries shock and horror. That's more than a full-time job. When would he have time to just be a child? Mrs. Lancaster, Dr. Thornfield responds with patronizing patience. Children like Ethan don't develop naturally. Every moment not spent in structured intervention is a moment lost to inappropriate behavioral reinforcement. Robert feels something snap inside him at the casual dismissal of Ethan's humanity. Children like Ethan develop beautifully when they're understood and accepted rather than forced to perform neurotypical behaviors. Charles turns on him with corporate fury. Mr. Miller, you've had 3 months to produce results, and this child is still essentially non-functional. Dr. Thornfield's program has a proven track record of making autistic children indistinguishable from their peers. By breaking down their natural coping mechanisms and forcing them to mask their authentic selves, Robert responds, his professional diplomacy finally abandoning him completely. That's not development, that's trauma disguised as therapy. NTHE room falls into tense silence, broken only by the soft sound of Lucy continuing to hum reassuringly to Ethan, whose distress has gradually begun to diminish under her patient, understanding presence. NDR. Thornfield's expression hardens with professional offense. Mr. Miller, I don't think you understand the severity of this child's condition. Without intensive intervention, he'll never be able to function independently, attend mainstream schools, or contribute meaningfully to society. He's already contributing meaningfully. Robert says, his voice gaining strength as he looks at Ethan and Lucy creating their own peaceful space despite the adult chaos surrounding them. He's teaching advanced mathematical concepts, demonstrating sophisticated emotional intelligence, and building genuine social connections. The only thing preventing his full participation in society is people who refuse to recognize the value of different ways of being human. Victoria has been watching this exchange with growing certainty, her corporate mask finally slipping away to reveal the protective mother underneath. I think, she says quietly, everyone needs to leave my son alone and let him show us who he really is. NBUT Charles's expression suggests that the revelation Robert hoped for isn't coming. Instead, the corporate pressure is about to intensify in ways that will force Victoria to choose between her son's well-being and everything she's built in her professional life. NTHE's storm outside reaches its peak, rattling windows as if nature itself is protesting the way Ethan's worth is being debated by people who've never learned to see the beauty in different ways of experiencing the world. NTHE tension in the sunroom reaches a breaking point as Dr. Thornfield pulls out a formal evaluation form, her pen poised to document what she clearly considers Ethan's. I need to conduct a standardized assessment, she announces, approaching Ethan with the clinical detachment of someone who views children as collections of behaviors to be measured rather than human beings to be understood. And Ethan, she says in an artificially bright voice that makes Robert's skin crawl, I'm going to ask you some questions. I need you to look at me and answer clearly. Ethan's response is immediate and heartbreaking. He shrinks back against the wall, his hands flying to his ears as his careful morning routine dissolves under the pressure of forced interaction. Lucy moves protectively closer, but Dr. Thornfield waves her away with dismissive authority. The peer model needs to step back so I can conduct an accurate assessment. She instructs, treating Lucy like an obstacle rather than recognizing her as Ethan's chosen communication partner. Don't touch him, Robert says sharply as Dr. Thornfield reaches toward Ethan to physically redirect his attention. He's clearly in distress. Distress is often part of the therapeutic process. Dr. Thornfield responds with chilling professional certainty. These children need to learn that their comfort zones aren't more important than social expectations. Victoria watches her son's obvious suffering with growing horror, her maternal instincts warring against years of corporate conditioning that taught her to defer to expert opinions and measured outcomes. Charles stands behind Dr. Thornfield with satisfied approval, as if Ethan's meltdown proves everything he's been arguing about Victoria's inadequate leadership. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," Charles says, his voice carrying the tone of someone delivering an inevitable verdict. "Victoria, your son is clearly not responding to intervention. Dr. Thornfield's program represents his only hope for eventual functionality, NDR. Thornfield nods, making rapid notes while Ethan rocks back and forth, his mathematical mind seeking comfort in repetitive motion that she immediately labels as self-stimulatory behavior requiring extinction protocols. The good news, Dr. Thornfield continues with breathtaking insensitivity, is that children this young are still malleable. With intensive behavioral modification, we can eliminate most of these maladaptive responses within 18 months. Eliminate? Victoria's voice carries a note of growing alarm. You want to eliminate the ways my son naturally regulates his emotions and processes the world? Mrs. Lancaster, you have to understand that these behaviors prevent integration into normal social environments. Dr. Thornfield explains with patronizing patience. Eye contact, verbal responses, compliance with adult directives. These aren't optional skills. They're requirements for functioning in society. Robert feels his professional composure finally shatter completely. Whose society? He demands, his voice louder than he intended. A society that demands conformity over authenticity? That values performance over genuine communication? Charles turns on him with corporate fury. Mr. Miller, you're clearly too emotionally invested in this situation to maintain professional objectivity. Perhaps it's time to consider whether you're the right fit for this position. NTHE implicit threat hangs in the air like a thunderclap. Robert realizes that speaking up for Ethan might cost him not just this job, but his ability to provide Lucy with the stability and opportunities Victoria's salary has made possible. The new house, the health insurance, Lucy's hearing aids, everything could disappear if he continues to challenge the evaluation. But looking at Ethan's distress, at Lucy's protective hovering, at Victoria's growing recognition of what these experts are actually proposing, Robert finds he doesn't care about the professional consequences. "You're right," he says quietly, his voice gaining strength as the words crystallize his understanding. "I am too emotionally invested. I'm invested in seeing Ethan as a complete human being rather than a collection of deficits to be corrected. I'm invested in celebrating his intelligence, rather than pathologizing his differences." NDR Thornfield looks up from her evaluation form with clinical annoyance. "Mr. Miller, emotional attachment clouds professional judgment. This child needs evidence-based intervention, not sentimental accommodation of maladaptive behaviors. ENEV, evidence-based according to whom?" Robert challenges. "Studies conducted by people who never asked autistic individuals what they actually need? Research that measures success by how well children can pretend to be neurotypical rather than how well they can develop their authentic communication strengths?" NTHE argument escalates as Charles and Dr. Thornfield present their united front of institutional authority against Robert's defense of Ethan's right to exist without forced conformity. Victoria watches this battle over her son's future with increasing certainty about where her loyalties must lie. "Stop," she says suddenly, her voice cutting through the professional debate with maternal authority. "Everyone stop talking about my son as if he's not in the room." NSHE moves to Ethan, kneeling beside him with the gentle approach Robert has taught her over the past months. "Sweetheart," she says softly, "these people are leaving now. You don't have to perform for anyone." Charles's expression hardens with corporate displeasure. "Victoria, you're making a serious mistake. The board expects measurable progress, and Dr. Thornfield represents the gold standard in autism intervention. The board can expect whatever they want." Victoria responds, her voice gaining the steel Robert has heard in her business calls but never directed toward protecting her son. "But Ethan is my child, not a corporate asset to be optimized for stakeholder approval." NDR Thornfield gathers her materials with offended professional dignity. "Mrs. Lancaster, refusing evidence-based treatment is a decision you'll regret when your son reaches school age and can't function in mainstream educational environments." "Maybe the problem isn't that Ethan can't function in those environments," Victoria says with growing conviction. Maybe the problem is that those environments refuse to accommodate different ways of learning and communicating. As the experts prepare to leave, Charles delivers his final ultimatum with the cold precision of someone accustomed to using economic leverage to control outcomes. Victoria, the board meeting is tomorrow. If you can't demonstrate that Ethan has made substantial progress toward conventional communication goals, we'll have no choice but to question your fitness for continued leadership of Lancaster Industries. NTHE threat is clear and devastating. Victoria's entire professional identity, her financial independence, her ability to provide for Ethan's future, everything depends on proving that her son can meet arbitrary standards set by people who see his autism as a business liability rather than a different way of experiencing the world. After Charles and Dr. Thornfield leave, the sunroom feels poisoned by their clinical assessment and corporate demands. Ethan gradually emerges from his protective posture, but his usual calm confidence has been shattered by the encounter with people who saw him only as a problem requiring institutional solutions. "I'm sorry," Victoria says to both Robert and Ethan, her voice thick with emotion. "I thought I could protect you from this kind of evaluation, but I underestimated how determined they are to reduce Ethan to a business problem." Robert surveys the damage, not just to Ethan's emotional state, but to the trusting relationship they've built over months of patient, respectful communication development. The corporate world has invaded their peaceful workspace and demanded that a 5-year-old boy prove his worth according to standards that have nothing to do with his actual capabilities or value as a human being. "What happens now?" Robert asks, though he suspects he already knows the answer. And Victoria looks at her son, then at Lucy, who has maintained her protective position throughout the ordeal. "Now I have to decide whether I'm a CEO who happens to be a mother, or a mother who happens to work in corporate leadership," she says quietly. NTHE choice before her is stark and painful. Defend her son's right to authentic development and lose everything she's built professionally, or sacrifice his well-being to maintain the corporate approval that funds their privileged lifestyle. NBUT as Robert watches Victoria comfort Ethan with the gentle techniques she's learned over their months together. He senses that the woman who Victoria sits in her study, staring at resignation letters she's drafted and deleted dozens of times, while the sound of Ethan's distressed stimming echoes from the sunroom, where he's been trying to rebuild his emotional equilibrium since the evaluation. Robert has stayed late, helping Lucy create calming patterns with colored pencils, while they wait for Ethan to feel safe enough to engage again. Victoria's phone hasn't stopped buzzing with messages from board members, corporate lawyers, and media consultants who've somehow learned about tomorrow's leadership review. The carefully constructed privacy around Ethan's diagnosis has crumbled under corporate pressure, and Victoria realizes that her son's autism is about to become public knowledge, whether she protects him or not. He hasn't spoken since they left, Victoria says, appearing in the sunroom doorway with red-rimmed eyes and coffee-stained clothes that show how far her usual composure has deteriorated. Not his musical sounds, not his mathematical explanations to Lucy. Nothing. Robert looks up from the gentle geometric patterns he's been drawing with Lucy, recognizing the particular silence that follows traumatic evaluation experiences. It's going to take time. What Dr. Thornfield did, forcing eye contact, demanding verbal responses, dismissing his natural communication, that kind of interaction can set a child back months. "I can't let them do this to him," Victoria says, her voice carrying a certainty that surprises Robert with its strength. "I won't sacrifice my son's well-being for corporate approval." NSHE pulls out her phone, scrolling through the endless stream of messages from people who want to discuss Ethan's management as if he were a business problem requiring strategic solutions. Charles has been busy. Half the board thinks I should accept Dr. Thornfield's recommendation immediately. The other half thinks I should resign and let someone without personal complications run the company. Robert sets down his pencil, recognizing the weight of the decision Victoria is facing. "What do you want to do?" "I want to protect my son," Victoria says without hesitation, "but I also know that if I lose control of Lancaster Industries, I lose the resources to provide him with the kind of support he needs. Private schools, therapy options, financial security, everything depends on my maintaining corporate leadership." From across the room, Ethan suddenly looks up from his silent block arrangement, his blue eyes focusing on his mother with unusual intensity. He doesn't speak, but his expression carries a wisdom that seems to transcend his 5 years. as if he understands exactly what's at stake in tomorrow's board meeting. "Ethan," Victoria says gently, moving closer to her son, "I need you to know that whatever happens tomorrow, it's not your responsibility. You don't need to change or perform or prove anything to anyone." To everyone's surprise, Ethan stands up and walks over to the presentation boards Victoria had prepared for the corporate meeting. His small finger traces the mounted photographs of his mathematical drawings, his collaborative work with Lucy, his moment-by-moment progress over the past months. Then he does something that makes Victoria's breath catch. He takes his mother's hand and leads her to the window, pointing outside where the storm has cleared to reveal a brilliant sunset painting the sky in complex geometric patterns of light and color. "Beautiful," he says softly, the first word he's spoken since the evaluation. His voice is quiet but clear, and he's not looking at Victoria when he says it. He's looking at the natural patterns in the sky that match the mathematical structures he creates with blocks and drawings. Victoria's tears come immediately, not because Ethan has finally spoken a word that might satisfy corporate evaluators, but because he's chosen to share his perception of beauty with her in this moment of crisis. Robert realizes that Ethan's single word communicates more authentic emotion and connection than hours of forced verbal responses ever could. That's the first time he's ever described something as beautiful. Victoria whispers, her hand still held in Ethan's small grip. He sees patterns everywhere, in music, in mathematics, in nature, but he's never named the emotion they create in him. Lucy looks up from her drawing, her face brightening with understanding. "Ethan taught me that patterns aren't just pretty," she explains with 7-year-old wisdom. "They're like songs that your eyes can hear." He's showing you how he feels inside when everything fits together perfectly. The simple profundity of this insight hits Robert like a revelation. Ethan's entire way of communicating, his mathematical drawings, his careful spatial arrangements, his musical tones, represents a sophisticated emotional vocabulary that most adults never learn to recognize, let alone appreciate. Victoria's phone rings with an incoming call from Charles Whitman, but for the first time in months, she declines it without hesitation. "Whatever they want to discuss can wait," she says, her attention remaining focused on her son's gentle explanation of how light patterns remind him of the music he hears in his mind. "Victoria," Robert says carefully, "what if tomorrow's presentation focused on showing the board who Ethan really is rather than trying to prove he can meet their expectations?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if instead of defending his progress according to their criteria, you help them understand the value of his unique way of experiencing the world?" Robert gestures toward Ethan, who is now showing Lucy how sunset patterns match musical intervals. Look at what he's teaching her about mathematics, about beauty, about finding connections between seemingly different concepts. Victoria watches her son's patient instruction, seeing perhaps for the first time how his differences aren't deficits to be corrected, but gifts to be celebrated. The board would never understand that kind of presentation. Maybe they don't need to understand it, Robert suggests. Maybe they just need to see that you understand it, and that your understanding makes you a better leader, not a compromised one. The idea takes shape gradually, born from watching Ethan create beauty from complexity, while corporate experts demanded he suppress his natural talents in favor of artificial normalcy. Instead of trying to make Ethan appear neurotypical for board approval, what if Victoria used tomorrow's meeting to demonstrate how accepting neurodiversity creates stronger, more innovative leadership? "I'd be risking everything," Victoria says quietly. "My position, my authority, the financial security that allows me to provide for Ethan's needs." "You'd be risking everything for something even more valuable," Robert counters. "The chance to model authentic leadership for your son, to show him that his worth doesn't depend on other people's approval." Ethan releases his mother's hand and returns to his blocks, but now his building takes on a different quality, less defensive, more open to including others in his creative process. Lucy joins him naturally, and together they begin constructing something that incorporates both mathematical precision and artistic beauty. Victoria watches their collaboration with growing conviction. "What if I lose the company? What if you save your son?" Robert responds. "And maybe, in the process, help other families avoid the kind of evaluation trauma we witness today?" The phone rings again, another board member wanting to discuss Ethan's management, but Victoria powers it off completely. For the first time since Robert has known her, she chooses her role as a mother over her obligations as a CEO. "I need to write a different kind of presentation," she says with growing determination, one that shows them what leadership actually looks like when it's informed by understanding, acceptance, and love. Anne's evening settles over the Lancaster estate. Victoria begins drafting remarks that will either end her corporate career or transform it into something unprecedented. A leadership style that values authentic human development over artificial performance metrics. NBUT Robert senses that tomorrow's board meeting will test more than Victoria's professional courage. It will determine whether the relationship growing between their two families can survive the institutional pressures trying to tear them apart. NTHE morning of the board meeting dawns clear and bright, as if yesterday's storm has washed the air clean for whatever transformation awaits. Robert arrives at the Lancaster estate to find Victoria in the kitchen, not dressed in her usual corporate armor, but wearing a simple blue dress that brings out her eyes, the same blue as Ethan's. She's making breakfast with her hands instead of having it prepared by staff, and there's something different about her movements, more grounded, more present. "I've been up since 4, she admits, flipping pancakes with surprising domestic competence. "Not preparing corporate presentations this time, but thinking about what kind of mother I want to be, what kind of leader I want to model for Ethan." Ethan sits at the breakfast table with Lucy, both children working on a collaborative drawing that incorporates mathematical sequences with artistic flourishes. Their easy partnership has returned overnight, as if Ethan's single word, beautiful, has restored his confidence in communicating with people who understand his language. The board meeting is at 10. Victoria continues, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she's about to risk. "I've decided to bring Ethan and Lucy with me." Robert nearly drops his coffee cup. "Victoria, that's unprecedented? Inappropriate? Corporate suicide?" She smiles, but there's steel underneath. "Probably all of the above. But I've realized that if I can't defend my son in front of the people I work with, then I'm working with the wrong people." Lucy looks up from the drawing, her expression brightening with excitement. "We get to see where you work? Is it really as tall as the clouds?" "Almost." Victoria laughs, and Robert notices how natural the sound is, how different from the controlled, professional responses he's grown accustomed to. But the most important thing isn't how tall the building is, it's what kind of decisions get made inside it. Robert studies Victoria's face, reading the transformation that's taken place overnight. The woman who once needed to translate her son's development into corporate-friendly metrics has become someone willing to challenge the entire system that demanded those translations. What exactly are you planning to tell them?" Robert asks. Victoria pours orange juice into glasses with the same precision Ethan brings to his block arrangements. "The truth, that my son has taught me more about leadership, innovation, and authentic communication in 5 years than 2 decades of business school and corporate experience ever did." NSHE sits down with them, creating the kind of family breakfast scene that probably hasn't happened in this formal dining room since Ethan was diagnosed. "I'm going to tell them that neurodiversity isn't a liability to be managed. It's a strength to be leveraged. That Ethan's way of seeing patterns and connections gives me insights into complex problems that conventional thinking misses." Ethan looks up from his drawing, making brief but deliberate eye contact with his mother. "Patterns," he says clearly, pointing to the mathematical spirals he and Lucy have created together. "Like Mama's work patterns." NTHE's second voluntary verbalization in 12 hours sends visible shock through Victoria's system, but this time it's joy rather than corporate anxiety. "Yes, sweetheart. Exactly like Mama's work patterns." Robert realizes that Ethan's emerging verbal communication isn't happening because of pressure or intervention, but because he feels safe enough to share his sophisticated thinking with people who value his unique perspective. The boy has been ready to speak all along. He just needed adults who were ready to listen without judgment. "There's something else," Victoria says, her voice taking on the tone Robert recognizes when she's about to make a decision that will change everything. "I want to offer you the position of Director of Neurodiversity Innovation at Lancaster Industries." The title hits Robert like a thunderbolt. "Director of what?" "I want to create an entire division focused on understanding and supporting neurodivergent thinking in business environments," Victoria explains, her executive vision expanding beyond personal concerns to systemic change. Ethan's mathematical insights, his pattern recognition, his attention to detail, these aren't deficits to be corrected. They're competitive advantages that most companies are too ignorant to recognize. Lucy claps her hands in excitement, though Robert suspects she understands more about the emotional significance than the professional implications. "Daddy, Does that mean you get to help lots of kids like Ethan? It means, Victoria says, looking directly at Robert, that we stop treating neurodiversity as a problem requiring solutions and start recognizing it as innovation requiring support. The audacity of the proposal takes Robert's breath away. Victoria isn't just risking her current position. She's proposing to transform Lancaster Industries into something unprecedented in corporate America, a company that actively seeks out and supports neurodivergent thinking. And Victoria. The board will never approve funding for something like that, Robert says, though part of him is already imagining the possibilities. Charles Whitman wants Ethan in intensive compliance training, not celebrated as a model for corporate innovation. Then Charles Whitman and I have fundamentally different visions for the future of this company. Victoria responds with growing conviction. And it's time for the board to choose which vision they want to support. And as they prepare to leave for the meeting, Robert watches Victoria help Ethan pack his favorite mathematical drawing supplies in a small bag. She's not bringing him to the corporate office to prove he can behave like a neurotypical child. She's bringing him to demonstrate the value of thinking differently. The drive to Lancaster Tower feels like a journey toward destiny rather than just another corporate meeting. Lucy chatters excitedly about seeing Victoria's office, while Ethan quietly arranges his drawing materials in precise patterns. Victoria drives with the calm focus Robert associates with her business persona, but there's something else now. A maternal fierceness that makes her previous executive confidence look shallow by comparison. And, whatever happens today, Victoria says as they pull into the executive parking garage, I want you both to know that you've given me something I didn't even realize I was missing. What's that? Robert asks. The courage to be exactly who I am instead of who other people think I should be, she answers, looking at Ethan in the rearview mirror. My son has been modeling authentic self-expression his entire life. It's time I learned from his example. And as they ride the elevator to the 52nd floor, Robert realizes that today's board meeting will determine more than Victoria's professional future or Ethan's access to supportive services. It will test whether corporate America is ready to embrace a completely different understanding of leadership, innovation, and human value. Ethan stands quietly between his mother and Robert, his mathematical mind probably calculating patterns in the elevator's movement, while preparing to share his unique perspective with adults who have never learned to appreciate the sophisticated communication he's been offering all along. The elevator doors open onto a floor where Ethan's worth as a human being is about to be debated by people who measure success in quarterly profits and shareholder approval. But Victoria steps out first, her hand holding her son's, ready to defend not just his right to exist authentically, but the revolutionary idea that authentic existence might be exactly what corporate leadership needs. The battle for Ethan's future, and the future of how society values neurodivergent thinking, is about to begin in a boardroom where the stakes have never been higher for everyone involved. The Lancaster Industries boardroom falls silent as Victoria enters with Ethan, Lucy, and Robert, their presence disrupting the formal corporate atmosphere. The massive conference table, polished to mirror brightness, reflects the shocked faces of 12 board members who clearly weren't expecting children to attend what they assumed would be a disciplinary meeting about Victoria's leadership capabilities. Charles Whitman sits at the far end of the table, his expression shifting from surprise to barely controlled outrage as he takes in the unprecedented breach of corporate protocol. Beside him, other board members whisper among themselves, some curious, others obviously uncomfortable with the intrusion of family dynamics into their sterile business environment. Victoria, Charles says, his voice carrying the icy disapproval of someone whose authority has been challenged. This is highly irregular. Board meetings are confidential corporate proceedings, not family gatherings. You're absolutely right, Charles. Victoria responds, her voice calm, but carrying newfound steel. This is irregular. Because for too long, I've been pretending that my role as Ethan's mother and my responsibilities as CEO exist in separate worlds. NSHE helps Ethan into a chair at the conference table, treating him not as an unwelcome disruption, but as a participant whose presence belongs in discussions about his future. Lucy settles beside him, immediately pulling out paper and colored pencils to create a comfortable workspace that mirrors their usual collaborative environment. Ladies and gentlemen, Victoria begins, standing at the head of the table with the same authority she's always commanded, but now infused with something deeper than corporate confidence. 3 months ago, you questioned whether my personal challenges with Ethan affected my professional judgment. Today, I want to show you how my son has actually transformed my understanding of leadership, innovation, and what this company could become. Board member Margaret Foster, a woman in her 60s who's known for her direct communication style, leans forward with obvious skepticism. Victoria, we're here to discuss your fitness for continued leadership, not to observe therapeutic activities. Actually, Margaret, I think you'll find they're the same thing. Victoria responds, moving to stand behind Ethan's chair. Ethan, would you show everyone the pattern work you and Lucy have been developing? Without looking up from his paper, Ethan begins drawing with mathematical precision, geometric shapes that intersect and flow into increasingly complex designs. Lucy adds complementary elements, their collaboration creating something that appears to be both artistic expression and advanced mathematical modeling. What you're witnessing, Victoria explains to the room of confused executives, is my son demonstrating spatial reasoning abilities that our architectural and engineering departments struggle to achieve. His pattern recognition skills surpass our most sophisticated market analysis algorithms. Charles interrupts with corporate impatience. Victoria, this is exactly the kind of emotional reasoning that concerns the board. You're attributing professional capabilities to a child's random doodling. Random? Robert speaks for the first time, his voice carrying the authority of professional expertise. Mr. Whitman, what Ethan is creating represents advanced geometric principles that most adults never master. His mathematical thinking operates at a level that would revolutionize product design if anyone took the time to understand it. NDR. Patricia Wells, the board's only other woman and someone Victoria has always respected for her analytical mind, studies Ethan's drawings with growing interest. These patterns, they're similar to the optimization models our tech division has been struggling with for months. And Victoria feels a surge of hope as at least one board member begins to see what she's been trying to communicate. Exactly. Ethan doesn't think in linear progressions like neurotypical minds. He sees systems, connections, and patterns that conventional analysis misses. Ethan looks up briefly, making eye contact with Dr. Wells in a moment of spontaneous connection. Fibonacci, he says clearly, pointing to a spiral pattern in his drawing. Like Mama's building patterns. NTHE room falls completely silent as board members process hearing Ethan speak directly about mathematical concepts that relate to architectural design, one of Lancaster Industries' primary business areas. Did he just? Dr. Wells begins, then stops, looking at Victoria with new understanding. How long has he been making these connections between mathematical principles and our building projects? Since he was 3, Victoria answers, her voice gaining confidence as she sees recognition dawning in at least some board members' faces. I've been showing him architectural plans since he learned to walk, and he consistently identifies design inefficiencies that our engineering teams miss. Charles's face reddens with what appears to be anger at having his authority challenged by a 5-year-old's mathematical abilities. This is preposterous. You're asking us to base corporate decisions on the scribbles of an autistic child. NTHE casual dismissal of Ethan as merely an autistic child creates a moment of crystalline clarity for Victoria. She realizes that Charles represents everything wrong with conventional leadership, the inability to recognize value that doesn't conform to predetermined expectations. Charles, Victoria says, her voice carrying the full weight of her accumulated authority, you've just demonstrated exactly why your vision for this company's future is fundamentally flawed. NSHE moves around the table, her presence commanding attention from every person in the room. You see my son's autism as a liability because you can't imagine intelligence that doesn't look like your own. But Lancaster Industries has always succeeded by finding value that others overlook, by innovation that comes from thinking differently. Lucy looks up from her collaborative drawing with Ethan, her 7-year-old voice cutting through the corporate tension with startling clarity. Ethan sees patterns that grown-ups miss because they're too busy looking for the wrong things. NTHE's simple profundity of this observation from a child creates visible impact among board members who've spent their careers analyzing complex business problems. Dr. Wells actually laughs, a sound of surprised recognition rather than dismissal. "And of the mouths of babes," she murmurs, then addresses Victoria directly. "What exactly are you proposing?" Victoria takes a deep breath, knowing that her next words will either end her career or transform it completely. "I'm proposing that Lancaster Industries become the first major corporation to actively recruit and support neurodivergent thinking. That we create a division specifically designed to leverage the unique cognitive strengths that people like Ethan bring to complex problem solving." The audacity of the proposal sends murmurs around the room. Some shocked, others intrigued. Charles stands abruptly, his corporate composure finally cracking completely. "This is insanity," he declares. "You're suggesting we restructure a billion-dollar corporation around accommodating disabled employees. I'm suggesting we revolutionize our approach to innovation by recognizing that neurological diversity creates competitive advantages." Victoria responds without backing down. Ethan's pattern recognition, his attention to detail, his ability to see systemic connections, these aren't disabilities. They're exactly the cognitive strengths that will determine which companies thrive in an increasingly complex global economy. Robert watches the room's dynamics shift as Victoria's vision begins to take hold among board members who've built careers on recognizing emerging opportunities. The conversation has moved beyond whether Ethan can meet conventional expectations to whether conventional expectations are sufficient for future success. "What would this division actually do?" asks board member Thomas Chen, a younger executive known for his interest in disruptive technologies. "Everything our current departments do, but with cognitive approaches that neurotypical thinking misses." Victoria explains, her executive vision expanding in real time. Product design informed by different sensory processing. Market analysis that recognizes patterns conventional algorithms overlook. Problem solving that approaches challenges from angles our competitors never consider. Ethan continues drawing throughout this discussion, occasionally sharing his materials with Lucy, completely absorbed in creating mathematical beauty, while adults debate the value of his unique way of experiencing the world. Robert senses that the board's decision will determine more than just Victoria's professional future or Ethan's access to understanding. It will test whether corporate America is ready to embrace a fundamentally different definition of human value and productive capability. Revolution. Victoria is proposing isn't just about business innovation. It's about recognizing that authentic human diversity creates strength rather than requiring accommodation. And the outcome of this unprecedented boardroom discussion will ripple far beyond Lancaster Industries to influence how society views and values neurodivergent thinking. 3 years later, the Lancaster Miller Neurodiversity Innovation Center occupies an entire floor of what was once corporate office space, transformed into something that looks more like a hybrid between a research laboratory and a children's learning playground. Natural light streams through floor-to-ceiling windows onto workstations designed for different sensory needs, some with noise-dampening materials, others with textured surfaces, all of them flexible enough to accommodate the unique working styles of employees whose neurological differences have become the company's greatest competitive advantage. Robert stands in the center of this revolutionary workspace, watching teams of neurodivergent designers collaborate with traditional engineers on projects that have transformed Lancaster Industries from a regional construction company into a global leader in adaptive architecture. The company's stock price has tripled since Victoria's boardroom presentation, driven not by conventional metrics, but by innovations that emerged from embracing cognitive diversity. Ethan, now 8 years old and verbal in ways that continue to amaze specialists, sits at a specialized workstation designed to his exact specifications. He's consulting on the architectural plans for a new autism-friendly hospital, his mathematical insights helping architects understand how spatial design affects sensory processing for patients with different neurological needs. The corridor angles create sound amplification patterns that will overwhelm auditory-sensitive patients. Ethan explains to a team of visiting architects, his voice carrying the confident clarity of someone whose expertise is valued rather than questioned. If we adjust the ceiling height by 12 degrees and add these texture panels, the acoustic environment becomes supportive rather than stressful. Lucy, now 10 and fluent in both spoken and sign language, serves as a communication bridge between Ethan and the neurotypical team members. Her natural empathy and bilingual abilities have made her invaluable in helping different cognitive styles collaborate effectively. Victoria appears in the workspace doorway, no longer wearing the corporate armor that once defined her professional identity. Her clothing is elegant, but comfortable, chosen for function rather than intimidation, and her demeanor carries the confident warmth of someone who's learned to lead by understanding rather than controlling. "The Tokyo delegation is here for the final presentation," she announces to the team. They're specifically interested in how our neurodiversity approach to urban planning could help them design more inclusive public spaces. Robert feels a familiar surge of pride as he watches their unconventional team prepare for what could be Lancaster Industries' largest international contract. The Japanese consortium had initially been skeptical about consulting with a company that employed autistic designers, but preliminary results from their pilot projects had proven so effective that skepticism had transformed into eager partnership. "Dad," Lucy says, touching Robert's arm to get his attention, "Ethan wants to know if he can present his transportation flow patterns directly to the clients instead of having adults translate his ideas." NTHE request represents how far they've all come from the days when Ethan's communication was dismissed as insufficient. Now his unique perspective on spatial relationships and human movement patterns has become central to the company's most innovative designs. Of course, Robert responds, then addresses Ethan directly. "Would you like to use visual presentations, mathematical demonstrations, or verbal explanation?" "All three," Ethan answers with the matter-of-fact confidence of someone whose communication preferences are respected rather than corrected. Japanese architects understand mathematical precision. "I want to show them how movement patterns create harmony in urban spaces." NTHE transformation extends beyond professional success to personal revelations that continue to surprise Robert with their depth and complexity. Victoria approaches him as the team prepares for their presentation, her expression carrying the particular warmth she reserves for private moments between public responsibilities. "Robert," she says quietly, "there's something I need to discuss with you before the Tokyo presentation." NHE follows her to a quieter corner of the workspace, recognizing the tone that usually precedes important personal conversations. Over the past 3 years, their professional partnership has evolved into something more complex. A relationship built on shared values, mutual respect, and the deep connection that comes from protecting and nurturing each other's children. The Tokyo contract isn't just about international expansion. Victoria continues, her voice carrying nervous energy that surprises Robert. They've offered to establish a permanent neurodiversity research center in Japan, with full funding for families who want to relocate and help develop similar programs globally. The implications hit Robert immediately. The opportunity represents everything they've been working toward. The chance to export their model of inclusive innovation to a culture that could benefit enormously from understanding different cognitive approaches to problem solving. "That's incredible," Robert says, though he senses complexity in Victoria's expression that suggests the offer isn't straightforward. "They want both of us to lead the program," Victoria explains. "Not just professionally, but as a family unit." They specifically mentioned how Lucy and Ethan's collaboration demonstrates the value of integrated learning environments. NTHE word family hangs between them, loaded with implications they've been dancing around for months. Their professional partnership has created a domestic intimacy that feels natural, but remains officially undefined. They share holiday dinners, coordinate the children's schedules, and make decisions about educational and therapeutic approaches with the ease of people who've learned to parent together. "Victoria," Robert begins, but she interrupts with the directness that has always characterized her communication style. "I'm not asking you to make a decision based on business opportunities or even international adventure," she says, her voice gaining the courage he's watched her develop since that first boardroom confrontation. "I'm asking because somewhere along the way, we stopped being colleagues who happen to care about each other's children and became something that feels like family." And across the workspace, Ethan and Lucy work together on final preparations for their presentation. Their collaborative partnership now second nature after years of shared projects and mutual understanding. They've learned to complement each other's strengths, Ethan's mathematical precision, enhancing Lucy's intuitive communication skills, while her patient interpretation helps him share complex ideas with audiences who are still learning to appreciate neurodivergent thinking. And "Dad," "Mom," Lucy calls out, using the titles that have evolved naturally over months of shared parenting decisions. Ethan finished the 3D model of his transportation patterns. "It's so beautiful, it looks like art and math had a baby." NTHE casual family reference from Lucy crystallizes everything Robert has been feeling but hasn't known how to articulate. They have become a family, not through traditional structures or legal documents, but through the daily choice to show up for each other, to protect each other's vulnerabilities, and to celebrate each other's unique contributions to their shared life. The Tokyo opportunity would mean leaving everything familiar, Robert says, though his heart is already moving toward the adventure Victoria is describing. "We'd be taking everything important with us." Victoria responds, gesturing toward the children who've created something beautiful together while adults negotiate. "It's about whether they're ready to formalize the commitment they've already been living," to create a family structure that honors both children's needs while supporting each other's professional dreams. There's one condition, Robert says, his voice gaining the certainty that comes from understanding what matters most. And what's that? Ethan gets to help design our new home. And Lucy gets to choose the paint colors for her room. If we're doing this, we do it as a family that values everyone's input. Victoria's smile transforms her entire face, carrying the joy of someone who's found unexpected happiness in the midst of revolutionary professional success. I think they love that. Ethan's already been drawing floor plans for houses with perfect acoustic properties, and Lucy's been researching color theory for emotionally supportive interior design. And as they prepare to enter the conference room where their presentation will determine Lancaster Industries' international future, Robert reflects on the journey that brought them here. 3 years ago, he was a struggling single father working in a diner, convinced that his days of helping children communicate were over. Now he leads an innovation center that's transforming how society understands and values neurodivergent thinking. NBUT, the real transformation isn't professional, it's personal. In learning to support Ethan's authentic development, he's discovered a partner who shares his values about celebrating differences rather than correcting them. In watching Lucy and Ethan create their own unique friendship, he's found hope for a world where neurodiversity is recognized as strength rather than deficit. NTHE Tokyo presentation succeeds beyond their most optimistic projections, with the Japanese consortium not just funding their neurodiversity research center, but requesting consultation on similar programs throughout Asia. As they leave the conference room, Robert realizes that their family's future will be built around the revolutionary idea that authentic human differences create innovation rather than requiring accommodation. NSIX months later, as they stand in the Tokyo airport with suitcases full of collaborative art projects and mathematical models, Ethan takes Lucy's hand and points to the geometric patterns in the terminal's architecture. New patterns, he says with excitement, new beautiful patterns to explore together. And Robert understands that their adventure isn't just about building inclusive communities in a new country, it's about proving that families created through choice, respect, and shared commitment can be just as strong as those formed through traditional expectations. Sometimes the most beautiful patterns emerge when different elements find their perfect fit together, creating something more complex and valuable than any individual component could achieve alone. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.